today I am extremely happy to welcome Marco de Grazia of the Grazia Imports, but also of Terre, Nere, one of the leaders in wines from Mount Etna in Sicily, one of the pioneers of Sicilian wines and wines from Etna, who really put it on the map. But the reality is that Marco actually has quite a history in Italy. And in many cases, the Italian wine that we know today, as we know it today, he's been responsible for really forming that opinion that we have of it, and really bringing it to us, and shaping what we think of these days as some of the greatest regions in Italy today. So, Marco, welcome. How are you doing?
Fine, fine. Thank you very much. Fine, excellent.
So, today we're going to be talking a lot about the different terroir that you've explored and that you've developed there on Mount Etna. But before we really start going into like the real nitty-gritty details, I just kind of wanted to get a little bit of some information on how things are in Sicily, how things are on Mount Etna, and how you've all been affected by the current events.
Well, if I think generally speaking, on farms, not that much changes. I mean, life is as usual. You have to take care of the vineyards. You have to, go in there and plow and do all the pruning. And now I don't know what it's called. We're taking off the shoots that don't go to fruit, spollonare we call it here, and so on and so forth. So the only problem is that you have to, you can't see friends, you can't have the pleasure of drinking together and, carrying on and this and that. But, and plus we don't have that many infected people here. So it's actually very peaceful. And luckily I have my daughter with me, who's great company. And so everything is fine. But if you mean what's now compared to what it was like 10 or 20 years ago, another thing, and we can talk about that. Can you hear me?
Yes, can we get you? Went out there for a short period of time, but we've got you back.
Okay.
So it seems like things are well on their way, though, when it comes to the current vintage and the work that needs to be done in the vineyards.
Absolutely. It's quite different as far as I know from talking to other vineyard friends up in central and northern Italy, and in France. The harvest is it seems to be early. Seems to be that there's a couple of weeks of people that are early, and we're instead late. Oddly enough, we've had very cold weather and rainy weather until only about less than a week ago. So everything is fine, but it looks like the harvest is going to be a little below average as far as quantity goes. But everything is going very, very well. Absolutely. It looks good, but it always looks good now. Until you pick it, then you don't know until you pick really what happens. But now it's good.
Well, it's funny, I had mentioned earlier about how you were definitely a pioneer out on Mount Etna. But before we go into that backstory, for the people that don't know, de Grazia Imports, the work that you had done, bringing all of these producers to the United States that people hadn't heard about, and also helping define a lot of the styles that we've come to really love. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got started in this business, and how it ended you up to locating the positions on Etna that ended up becoming Terre, Nere and growing into the winery it is today?
Yeah, absolutely. Keep in mind one word, because I'm getting old and I forget, but keep that word you use, style, is extremely important. So we'll go back to that later, but it is a fundamental issue. Actually, it was very, in fact, I was guided by very simple thoughts. Basically, I looked for vignerons that had ownership of vineyards in very, very fine locations. In other words, the equivalent of Grand Crus or very fine Premier Crus. This is true of Piedmont, of Tuscany, and Veneto. Then the fact that these crus were established later or were classified later, because they were not classified at all when I came into the picture, is another matter. Because if you go to Piedmont, I mean, if you went there 40 years ago, because my company is 40 years old now, it's this year's 40th anniversary.
Amazing.
So, yeah, so if 40 years ago you went there, nothing was classified, but everybody knew, that Canubi gave us splendid wine, or Brunate did, or whatever, Rocca dell'Annunziata, or whatever. They knew what the good stuff was.
Right.
And so for me, it was, I just had to look around, but I had to find people that really believed in themselves and, really wanted to go for it, because it was, nobody can imagine what it was like. Nobody, unless you lived it.
Would you say it was more the younger generation, more open-minded at the time, or?
Well, yeah, well, not even that. It was just certain people that seemed to really want to do it, and to go all the way and to pay the price for it, which is very high. You have to just consider this, and this will put you, will give you a perspective. Dolcetto grapes cost much more than Nebbiolo grapes until the 90s.
Absolutely.
That's the consideration that people had of Barolo and Barbaresco. Dolcetto was worth more and sold more and was consumed more. 93% of Nebbiolo grapes went to co-ops and to negociants. 93%.
Amazing.
So, in that kind of atmosphere, trying to do something and being at the same time competitive with the price, which is very low of the wines, and to try to get people noticing it, you have to consider that all the wine that came to the States, or 90% of it, or 99% of it, went to Italian immigrants, or went to mom and pop trattorias,
Right.
Spaghetti and meatball places. Italian fine dining, which always has existed, never was exported, or was exported quite late. So you had some exceptions, like Valentino's in LA or something. I remember him. He was wonderful.
Okay, you're breaking up a little bit here, Marco.
Just started out, and hear me?
You just came back, but we lost you for, I'd say, a good 30 seconds.
Oh, I'm sorry. I really can't do much about it. Here we're in a sad place for communications.
Right.
But anyway,
well, okay. I guess it's a good example of just to give people an idea. We can keep on talking about how the Grazia imports came together and all, but what I'd love to do is give people an idea of the location that you're in, being on Mount Etna, the side of an active volcano, a volcano that to this day will erupt, and the work that you do taking place in that location. So just to give our viewers a bit of an idea of where you are. So this is a satellite image that you had sent to me during an eruption of Mount Etna, and what everybody can see here is the entire island of Sicily, and then off to the bottom right-hand side, the heel of the Italian peninsula. It's pretty stunning to see it in this perspective, as being a satellite photo. But if anybody's wondering why Marco's his video might be cutting out every here and there, this is the big part of the reason. He's literally, the winery is located on the side of an active volcano, if you can only imagine.
I mean,
But
look,
Marco,
look at the mushroom there. I mean, it went up, they say it went up 5 miles in the air, that mushroom. It looks like an atomic bomb.
it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And how close do you, as as a winemaker and in the vineyards there, how close do you guys come to actual lava flows and venting gases and things like that?
No, I mean, if it's a lava flow, there's another beautiful, yeah. If it's a lava flow, most lava flows, because this is a huge volcano. It's over 10,000 feet in altitude, right? So we're up there until about 1,000 meters, until 3,000 feet, or a little more than 3,000 feet. People live there, and land is cultivated. But lava flows rarely go that far down. They have a mile or so before they get there. They usually stop around 2,000 meters, 2,500. But sometimes they go all the way and they take away everything. And everything, they're unstoppable. I sent you that picture of that vineyard surrounded by lava, right? That was the 1981 lava flow, and that annihilated a Grand Cru.
Right, and yeah, so, that's something that I definitely do want to talk about today, because some of the more recent bottlings that you've created, as you've really started to expose a lot of these different vineyards, the stories behind them are absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing.
But look,
yeah,
you see, I mean, here in old world viticulture, I mean, think of what we're going through now. Okay, so you think this is bad, right? And it is. It's pretty bad, right? But think of all the vineyards in Europe when phylloxera hit. I mean, now you can get a feeling of it because you feel like under pressure in the world. But all of a sudden, all the farming in Europe, hundreds of thousands, millions of farmers, all of a sudden everything was dying. All their vineyards were dying. And yet they replanted. I mean, we are really sons of obstinate civilizations. I mean, that's what viticulture is. Phylloxera, and then First World War, and then Spanish flu, then Second World War, emigration, and still people, still they continue to plant. They continue to go through, thick and thin. There's a pride, a sense of duty, and I think also a wonderful dream. You don't do. I mean, here I am. I'm 60 something, right? And I'm still planning. Does that make any sense?
You're breaking up again, Marco. I'm sorry.
It doesn't. That you open what's after you. Had the luck, the goods behind you. So you feel you have to perpetuate that in some way. My great-grandfather had a wonderful phrase that he coined, and he put on his stationery so that everybody knew what he thought. And it was a very simple phrase. In Italian, it sounds better. In English, it goes something like, I have what I have given. And that kind of sums it up a bit, You
Right.
have, you somehow you have to give back what you have. And you think you own the vineyard. Materially you feel that, but it's more like the vineyard owns you. You're at the service of the vineyard in a way. I mean, that's how I think a lot of people feel that make wine.
It's unfortunate more people don't see it that way, these days. I mean, but you grew up surrounded by wine.
That's right. That's right. That's
I mean,
right.
you were telling me at a conversation you and I had about being surrounded by wine throughout your childhood. Growing up in
Exactly.
Florence. I mean, it's absolutely amazing to think. Coming from that and then living in that world your entire life. And I guess that when I think to a story about Bruno Giacosa and the story about how he learned his craft at his father's side, tasting fruit and vineyards to decide where to buy in order to, that's where we're going to make the wine from, and how that is what his real skill was. It was less about the winemaking and more about the ability to choose the fruit because of his upbringing.
Exactly.
And I think
Exactly.
that applies to what you're saying here as well.
Look, to give you an idea, okay, I had three teachers really, but two extremely important ones. One of them, Giulio Gambelli, you might have heard of him.
A
He,
couple times.
okay, he made he made the best wines of Tuscany. He made them all. I mean, he made extraordinary wines for 60 years of his life.
Hmm.
He was not a trained enologist.
Absolutely.
On his visiting card, he's say maestro assaggiatore, master taster,
Right.
and he didn't have a degree.
And some of
Now,
the greatest names in wine depended on him.
of course, Biondi Santi, Casibasse, Montevertine, and so on and so forth. Dozens. Okay, and my other and he was in his pupils are today the best winemakers in Tuscany and some of them in Italy.
Hmm.
And another teacher that I had was the owner of today you'd call it a wine bar, but it was a initiative, just a place where the old folk would go and sit down, play cards in the evenings, and have a glass of wine or a liter of wine. It's more like it, and maybe a fried egg or a piece of sausage or some salami, and hang out together. But they had the best wines, and he had a bad leg, so I put him in this beat up car, and he'd take me and show me not all the vineyards where the finest wines came from and why, the best exposures. This is in the Chianti, this is in Castellina area. And then he'd ask me to tell him about the world, right? And so we'd sit there and he'd tell me about all these things and we'd taste his wines because all the farmers wanted to have their wine in these mescite, you see, because it was their pride. So that when they went there with their pals, they'd be drinking, their wine. Everybody would be drinking their wine.
Hmm.
And so all the farmers, would take their best wine to the mescita and hope to have it chosen by the owner, who was a master in tasting these wines and in knowing all the countryside. You see, in Florence, okay, the guild of the Vinatieri, I guess it translates the wine merchant guild, goes back to 1266.
Hmm. That's amazing.
And when I was a kid, people people would samples in Piazza Signoria every Wednesday, every from the country. Bad. I mean, consider that the first appellation of the world was in Tuscany under the Medici, 1716, the first great appellation, and it was all the vineyards around Florence, from Carmignano to the Rufina, Pomino, everything, all these vineyards. And so you grew up that way, and you grew up in the middle of beautiful things. It was simple as that. So now, I mean, you carry all that with you. I mean, I haven't studied winemaking. I'm a graduate in classics and Greek, philosophy and theater. I mean, okay, the god of theater and the god of wine are the same god, right? But
Great.
so it's all this that carries you through, and finally this luggage of culture that you take with you that then defines you as a winemaker and defines your wines in the way you want to them and what you want them to express.
Well, I certainly look at you as something of a visionary. When it comes to my learning of Italian wines, I started studying different regions and hearing, these are the producers to look to here, and these are the producers to look to there. And I can't tell you how many times that I would seek out those producers. I would open that bottle. I'd be sitting, having dinner with my family, turn the bottle around, and realize it was a wine that you were bringing in. That happened so many times in my development through Italian wine. I can't even recall how many times, but it's something amazing to me. How many producers that you unearthed, not that you created them, but that they were there. You found them, and you were able to see in what they were doing that this is somebody that I should push forward and bring into the world, which is amazing, and it is absolutely such a talent. So how did this all, though, come to you discovering Terre Nere? How did you find your way to Etna, and then decide to, create your own winery there and start what has become, what started then as a location that few people knew about, which is today considered to be one of the leading regions in Italy? How did this begin?
Well, I had my distribution and consulting company, and somebody from Etna came to Florence and offered me their wine. Asked me to take their wine in my distribution, and so I went to Sicily because I said I have to see the estate. I have to see the vineyards. I have to see all this and before I take anything into my selection. And so I went. Eventually, I decided not to take the winery in my selection, but since I went there with my sailboat, since I sailed down with the crew, I decided to hang out for a while and go driving around Sicily and the Etna in particular. And when I tasted the wines of just simple farmers that didn't bottle, but generously offered the wine, and I saw this extraordinary potential in the wine, and so that was my job, to see potential in wines and to bring them to fruition. And so it was fairly easy to see this, and so I said, wow, it's a beautiful place. From my place here, in 45 minutes you can go skiing, and in 40 minutes you're swimming in the Ionian Sea. So I decided, okay, let put my foot here, get a little house, get a little vineyard, and get somebody to cultivate the vines for me, and then I'll make the wine. And that's how it started, simply as that. Then eventually, to make a long story short, I decided at a certain point I had to either turn it into something that made sense, or I'd have to quit because the problems were just, the distance was too far, the problems were too many. You can't make wine long distance, not the wine that I like to make.
Right.
And so I decided I bought another property, the one that you have in the picture here, and that building you see I built, but there's a little one next to it, and that's where I started making wine. That's why I started making the wines. But it was obvious to me from the very beginning that everything that we've been talking about until now, everything that I did in Piedmont, again in Piedmont, along with Gaia and a few others, Aldo Contadino, we were the first to put, the crew on the label.
Right.
Nobody did that before. And so for me, seeing this place, then reading the literature that there is to read about it, but finding everything this was clear. I put Guardiola on it. That was 2002, and that was the first. Everybody does it, and we use the Burgundy bottle. In fact, in the back of my Burgundy bottle, not the one that goes to the States, because it has, the back label has the government warning and all that kind of stuff. So you can't write that much. But in 2002, on my back label, I wrote that this is the Burgundy of the Mediterranean. That and now everybody speaks of that. We were the first to use the Burgundy bottle, and now everybody uses the Burgundy bottle. And so on, and so my idea, my point of view here, or vision, if you want to call it, is just that this was a place where the terroir changed dramatically from a little place to another place. This vineyard that you see here with the terracings that are on the sides, we vinify this we do 4 different vinifications and you can see that even the soil is worked in a different way. You see a little bit greener here, darker there, and so this is an older vine, this is a younger vine, this is different soil because it's on the terracings, and so I don't know, we do 50 vinifications of Nere and about 16, 17 of Caricante every year.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that for 20 years, you understand, you get to understand a lot of things. You accelerate the process. So the idea was always an idea of finding the Grand Crus here and buying them. And again, you go through the history, you go through speaking to the farmers, you try to figure it out, because it's really very simple. If you start with a Grand Cru or a Premier Cru, it might not be the first year, might not be the second year, but eventually you'll make a great wine. If you start with a Village, you can make a fine Village, but you'll never make a Grand Cru. It's very simple. And that's the direction.
And going back to 2002, what was that first bottling? Was it a range? Was it the Rosso or?
No, it was Guardiola, Etna Rosso Guardiola.
Which,
wait a second.
Yeah, it's funny. No worries. You stepped away for a second, but for me, that is one of those wines that can. That's beautiful. That is beautiful. That is one of the wines that when you talk about, the Burgundy of Etna or of the South, but people are always making that comparison when it comes to the reds coming from Etna right now, that it's somewhere in the middle between Burgundy and Barolo or Nebbiolo and Pinot Noir. You always get that. And I love that. But what I also love specifically about what you've created there is how different all of the crus are. When I had put onto Instagram this morning that we were going to be chatting here today, someone asked me, what is your favorite Terre Nere bottling? And my answer was, that's a completely unfair question, because the reality is that there is a place, in my opinion, for every single one of these wines. And as their portfolio has grown, I find them all to be just so amazingly different. And that right there is hats off to you for defining so many of these crus. So that was in 2002. Then which wines came after that? Because the ones that obviously that is one of the crus that I know. Calavera Santana is one of the crus that I have known since very early on.
That came in 2003.
And then
Feudo di Mezzo in 2004.
There you go. Feudo di Mezzo. Yeah. These are the ones that really defined what you were doing for me. For me, I think the first vintage I tasted of Terre Nere was 2005. And I immediately started putting them in my cellar and started following vintage after vintage since then.
And 2005, by the way, is drinking beautifully right now. And it was a very difficult vintage. Then 2007, we did Santo Spirito. But Eric, listen, we're talking about a long time ago. In 2007, when I released a 4th cru, the Santo Spirito, believe me, all my distributors said, please, with 3, you're not Burgundy, who the hell, and it's already difficult to sell, we're talking 13, 14 years ago, and nobody wanted the Santo Spirito.
Sorry, Marco, you're breaking up again.
That's that's how we have now, I think, and two whites. We have two. You have one of the whites drinking now. Can you hear me? No?
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
went out there, Marco.
Pardon me?
I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
You went out on us again there for about a minute.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're good now.
Okay. In the end, you see, one of the things that I really find fascinating in the world of wine, possibly the most fascinating, is the idea of a cru. Because, I mean, if you think, well, most people now know what they are, what a cru is, but defining it is not that easy. I mean, obviously it's a place, okay? It's a place where the climate and the soil deliver, well, how can you put it there? Well, deliver consistently wines of a particular refinement, okay? Or at least the potential, better, the potential for wines but these wines that have this particular refinement, this is what's so beautiful about them. They express themselves with discretion.
Mm.
They don't, I mean, they're not big old, huge, massive things. They are delicate creatures. And the higher up you go in the classification of the crus, the more discreet they are. They don't have to, they don't have to raise their voice. They don't have to flex their muscles, right? And at the same time, though, when you taste a really fine cru, something happens. It's like a déjà vu. You somehow there's something in that wine that you recognize, even if you've never tasted it before.
Right.
It's amazing. It's like touching a chord somewhere, and it's somewhere. You sense that it's taking you somewhere that you've been before, right? Or it's like a poem. It takes you through feelings that you thought maybe you forgot, or maybe you never had them. But there's something dreamy about it. There's something. But again, it's a potential. It's a potential that has to be guided. This is something fundamental that people should know, and should know clearly. This is extremely important. It's like when you're sailing, right? There's this wonderful winemaker, French winemaker, Dubourdieu, who's no longer with us, but he was also a sailor, and he had a sailboat on his label of his wine. I forget now the name of the wine, but it was a white Burgundy, and he would say, I mean, if you don't establish a route, if you don't have a direction, you're not sailing. There can't be a favorable wind for somebody who doesn't know where they're going. Right? It's impossible. And so you have to have this a direction, a drive, a will towards some kind of end when you get these wonderful grapes. After you've nursed the grapes, then you have to bring to light the wine, and you have to have the direction. You have to have a vision or something towards something beautiful that leads you through all the steps. All the decisions that you make are a fruit of this kind of vision, of this kind of drive, and you have to have that, and you have to use all of everything: science, imagination, experience. Everything instinct, right? Penaud said this very beautifully. Or you can take an example. When you're making the wine, the first thing that happens in the wine is the maceration fermentation, and it justly has two names, because the fermentation is a scientific process, which now we know what it is. For known known for a century, not that much, really, considering how long the wine making is, right? And then with masturbation, what that? I mean, how long, how gentle, how, why, wherefore? You know, it's not wine, fine wine, the best part of the grape. You're extracting, you want to extract the finest part of the grape in order to make the finest wine.
Well, I mean, I could tell you that one thing that's always been amazing for me is I've had a number of chances to listen to you speak.
Doing that, the gentleness.
Okay, it looks like we might have lost Marco for the moment. What I was going to say, I'm hoping he's going to be able to jump back on, is that one of the things that always amazed me about Terre Nere was in talking with Marco and tasting with Marco through multiple vintages, how inspiring it is to listen to him talk about his inspirations behind winemaking, and just how important it is to him, and how poetic a lot of it is that he has to say about winemaking.
I'm back now. Sorry,
No,
I lost.
Don't worry about it. So one thing I wanted to answer a couple of questions really quick, so we don't get them piling up too much, because you and I have been riffing back and forth on stuff, and I feel like we can do this all day. But so one person actually asked about, do you think the wines will ever reach the prices of Grand Cru Burgundy and the level of trade that these wines command? Now, I will say to that person first that I seriously hope they never reach the prices of Grand Cru Burgundy, because I enjoy drinking them so much, that since day one, they have represented amazing value. Even now that there's so much popularity going on here on Mount Etna, they're still an incredible value. And if they did ever reach that level of scarcity and value, you know, I would hope it wouldn't be too soon. But I will say that it would be justly deserved when you really start tasting through these different crus. But now more to you, Marco. You know, we talk about the different cru bottlings that you came with first. And now, if I'm not mistaken, some of these vineyards are actually remarkably close to each other. I have a question here from Carlo asking the differences between Santo Stefano. Well, this kind of, with my own knowledge of the of Etna, this is kind of a little bit, we can get into this as more of like different sides of the volcano and such. Santo Stefano, San Lorenzo, Caldera Satana, and the Prefluxera. So these are 4 vineyards that are actually pretty well scattered around Mount Etna, correct?
Okay, well, let's let the first question about the prices. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of old-fashioned. You know, when I was a kid and I started getting into wine, I don't know what the young sommeliers do today, because I don't know how they can possibly get a wine culture of great classics. I mean, I don't believe that wines should cost as much as some of the Grand Crus cost today. It's just silly. It really doesn't go with life or something, you know. So I don't think, at least my wines, I've always been, you know, careful with my pricing, because I'd like to have everybody be able to drink some fine wine and enjoy it. Now, the San Lorenzo, Calderara, and Santo Spirito, were those the 3? San Lorenzo, Calderara, Prefluxera. Okay, Prefluxera is actually, I'm losing you, but the Prefluxera, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, the Prefluxera is in the Calderara vineyard. Okay, so the Prefluxera is a super Calderara. This is the Guardiola. On the label, you have Guardiola in the winter, and in front, in the background, you have the Nebrodi Mountains. So this is unusual because you would never imagine, snow in Sicily, we're one of the southernmost parts of the European Mediterranean. But this vineyard is about 900 meters altitude, so it's very high. It's one of the highest red vineyards in Europe. But the a mile away from San Lorenzo, Randazzo. So in fact, as you go from north towards northwest, you get the coldest climates. Oh, here I am back again. Oh, okay. You have the map.
I thought it made sense to put this up to best describe the different vineyard sources you're talking about, especially with San Lorenzo.
So San Lorenzo is, you see, the northwestern tip is where San Lorenzo is.
Right.
The furthest where the appellation ends. Whereas Calderara is that kind of orangish part due absolute north.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Calderara is. And the characteristic that unites that they have in common is that they have the oldest superficial and plantable soil in the whole of the Etna. On the label, crosswise, it'll say Grande Terroir Ellittico. The Ellittico period is a geological era of the volcano. And there's only very few places where this soil has escaped, this ancient soil has escaped lava flows in the last 70, 80,000 years, you see? So it's the most complex soil. It's the one that's broken down the most with respect to other soils. And perhaps perhaps I'm saying, that may be one of the clues to the finesse of the wines from those areas. This map here, though, is not a geological one. This is a meteorological one. And that shows you the diversity, the incredible diversity of the climates, right? Where I planted my last vineyard on the east side, it rains statistically twice as much as it rains where I am. Okay,
now,
twice.
Sorry, are you able to give us an idea just of where these vineyards are on this map, even if it's just like very general?
Due east, southeast. Milo, the little township of Milo, the smallest township of the volcano, which actually has a very peculiar soil because it was formed by the volcano, the side of the volcano that caved down and slid down all the way to the sea and gave it a soil that's completely different from everywhere else, but also the climate. I mean, consider that on Etna, in general, it rains 5 times as much as on the rest of Sicily. And this little town, it rains 10 times as much, twice as much as on the rest of the Etna. So that gives you an idea of in fact, you can't make red wines there. You can make rosé, but you can't make red wines there because you don't have the weather for that, and you're in the same appellation. So that shows you how different. And as you can see, the appellation goes around the volcano. It doesn't do the west side because it's too cold,
Right.
but it goes all the way around. And the appellation, which is another unique thing, goes from 400 meters altitude to over 1,000 meters. I mean, there's no appellation that has 600 meters, or even the half of that, that I know of anywhere in Italy, nowhere that I know of in France or Spain.
You were mentioning the white wines. Is there, and I'm a huge fan of the Caricante that you produce. But just to kind of add to this discussion, I happen to be, what I'm sipping on today is one of your Caricante bottlings. This
Caldera.
Caldera Santana, but I'm sipping on the Santo Spirito, which in my
Okay.
opinion, I mean, just as the reds of Etna are like the Burgundy, between Burgundy Nebbiolo, the whites of Etna are easily like white Burgundy to me. I love them to death. But now, when I think of your two white wines, that at one point was one, you separate them to the two crus. I noticed they're both coming from crus that also produce red wines. So, what really differentiates? Are there different areas in here that are better for whites versus red? And how does that relate to the fact that you make your two amazing white wines from vineyards that I originally knew as being red wine vineyards? Sorry if it's a lot of information at once there, but do we have a difference? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
It's very simple. You'll find that all over. Okay, so as the red wines get less important, you start seeing the presence of white wines. And then the less good the reds, the more white wines you have.
Mm-hmm.
And then up to a point, then in the end, you only have white wines. The idea is that aside generalizing and not thinking of crus and things like that, basically white wines ripen by light. They need light and brilliant light to ripen. They don't need heat as much as red wines. That's why in Germany you can make wonderful wines, but they're white, right? Mm-hmm. Because you don't need the heat. So that's why in this little town of Milo, which is cold and humid and rainy, you make interesting whites, very interesting, and you can't make reds. So in the north part of the Etna, where I am, where all my vineyards, it was by far the most famous place. It was the Côte d'Or of the Etna. So all the reds from there were extremely precious. So nobody planted white. Absolutely. When I started, I mean, my first white wine was a field blend of mixed grapes, mostly Caricante, but also Catarratto and Insolia, that came because everybody planted, 5%, 7% of white with the reds to make the reds a bit softer so they could be drunk earlier. So I just took all of them, but that's all they had on the north side. And therefore, I had to plant vineyards, and I had to make the decision where to plant the whites. Mm-hmm. You see, so again, it's you don't have in my area. There's no tradition for whites, so you try to take to make decisions that are very important because it's a long-term project. I mean, you have to plant, wait 3-4 years, and then so on and so forth. And so I chose these two places. And in fact, I'll tell you that I planted a vineyard which is coming into production this year in Calderara. I found it at the highest point of Calderara, surrounded by a wood, so very cool and fresh, but with extraordinary Calderara soil, all stones. You can't see the soil for the stones. Mm-hmm. I'm positive that once those grapes will go into or will be good enough for strong enough in 3 or 4 years to go into the Calderara that I already have, it will make that wine even finer. So whereas with the reds, I have the experience, or 20 years experience. With the whites, we have less experience, so we have more space to grow and to improve, which is a wonderful thing. That's the wine that I'll release. I mean, the vineyard surrounded by lava. You see,
right.
That's
your new project, right? That you're saying is coming out in 2019.
Yes. No, 2019 vintage, released next year. Yeah, that gives you an idea. You see, that is the only surviving vineyard in the whole of that crew, and everything else was wiped out. And that, I mean, we make 3 barrels, right? That's all. In fact, I don't even own all of it because the uncle of the people that I bought owns the little piece of it, and he gives me the grapes. But that's all I make, 3 barrels. That's all I'll make. Maybe
Mm.
I'll make 4 in time, but that's it. But they're very old vines, probably average 60, 70-year-old vines. And if you look on the bottom right corner, very bottom right corner, you'll see some vines. That is my highest San Lorenzo vineyard. So that's how I discovered this little one. You know, I was working in this vineyard. I looked across the lava. I saw this little house, and then so I walked across the lava bed, and people were, you know, these 4 brothers were farming it, and eventually I talked them into selling me the piece.
That's
But
amazing.
it's extraordinary, extraordinary wine, extraordinary.
And this also, the San Lorenzo Vineyard is a similar kind of situation where you had a lava flow that left this small piece of land with a very individual
Exactly.
terroir.
Exactly. I started with a tiny little piece of land which doesn't even have a you know, a geometric shape, because the lip of the lava just ate into the vineyard. And I started that. The first vintage was 2009. The, so I devoted that to where I make a beautiful bottle, and now I have a nice chunk.
Can you tell me, because this is something that's very new to me. 2017 is the first time that I had seen this. The Monganaze Vineyard.
Am I?
Sorry, you're back. I'm sorry. No, I was saying this is one of the first times I've actually seen this specific bottling. Can you tell us a little bit about this? This is because this is new to me as well. This is gonna be the first time I'm tasting this.
Yes, that yes, that is a wonderful wine. The vineyard is in the township of Castiglione. Okay, now the two most famous, historically most famous, recognized vineyards were Guardiola and Moganazzi, and Santo Spirito a close third. Santo Spirito and Guardiola, by the way, are adjacent, which is extraordinary. If you taste the wines, they're radically different, but they're adjacent vineyards. So Moganazzi, again, I started making that wine in very small quantities for this children's project thing that I have, and then I was able to buy the adjacent vineyard to the one that I have, and I had more grapes. And now I'm buying a third piece, by the way, that's adjacent on the other side. And so I make about 3,000 bottles, and the wine is very, very. It's a brilliant wine, brilliant in the sense that it's luminous and it has a wonderful grip as it's young. Then, at the same time, very, very fine. It has the same kind of energy that you get in a Gevrey, that bright, beautiful, floral character, and again a nice structure, a nice grip to it. Then it remains athletic even when it ages, but it softens and becomes beautiful and dusky. It's a remarkable wine. It's a beautiful vineyard. It's a 70-year-old to 80-year-old vines. It's all terraced, very steeply terraced. Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, you can taste it and see what you think.
Oh, I can't wait after that description. That's for sure. So we're actually starting to run out of time a little bit. So I just wanted to cover a couple of other little things. We did have some question and answer, but also some stuff that I wanted to ask you that relates to this question and answer. One of the most important questions here is your opinion on some of the most recent vintages. Like, what are some of the best recent vintages that you've seen there, Annette? And I know there's a lot of talk about 16. I know 16 has been pretty incredible, but what are your thoughts there?
Well, 16 is a beautiful vintage. It's a real classic. And by classic, I mean a vintage that that has some kind of austerity. It doesn't deliver. It's not as generous as other vintages, but it is so it's a bit shyer, but has a wonderful structure and a beautiful the way the way the wine is woven. It has a texture that's remarkable. It will age beautifully. It's tasting beautifully as well, but it's still a bit shy. The 2017 that you had in your hand is very much like the 2016 in power, and but its presence, its stage presence, as it were, is different. It has a little bit more softness. It's a bit more voluptuous. It has the same sinew, but it has more flesh on its bones. It's a magnificent vintage as well, and because it's not over the top.
Mhm.
It's not Rococo or Baroque or anything like that, which I dislike. Uh, but that's the way it is. But and then 2015 for me is the most graceful of all vintages. It's absolutely gorgeous. Right now, it's one of my favorite vintages. It doesn't have the structure of the 16s, but it makes up everything for that with this extraordinary bouquets. So we were very fortunate. 14 is a bit over the top for me. It's a massive. It's like a monster vintage. It's it's a bit too much. It's like 1990. We'll have to wait a long time, and who knows if it'll come around or not. And then the 2018, I feel right now I've just bottled it. I'm bottling it now. I'm finishing bottling the cruise, the single vineyards of 18s, and they're lovely and gracious. They don't have the structure. I believe they will show beautifully, much like the 2005 and 2010s. Uh, um, but they are like a vintage in a lovely minor key, you know. So they have a gentility about them that I like. You see, I had a great friend of mine from Burgundy over not too long ago, and we were talking about vintages, and he said something that I loved. He said, "Look, I don't even know what a good vintage is anymore."
Right.
He's perfectly right. I mean, I don't know anymore. I try to describe a vintage,
Mhm.
but frankly, his wines are, and he's one of my heroes. Okay, my heroes are the people that make great wine every vintage. You know, whether again minor or major key, he whether his villages and his Grand Crus, his Premier Crus, everything he touches is beautiful. That takes a dedication that's extraordinary. See, in the end, that's what I would like people to say about Terre. I would like them to say that, you know, you can have your vintage wherever you are in the world. It can be a simple Etna Rosso or a Calderara or Santos Peter, whatever. It'll always deliver some kind of joy, and that's that. But 19 is going to be another. I mean, for the whites, it's nonpareil. For the reds, it's absolutely beautiful. It's like a blend of 2016 and 17. It's absolutely extraordinary. But you know, there you go. They're all wonderful vintages. And as they age, it's amazing how things will surprise you. You know?
Well, one of my favorite sayings is, buy the producer, not the vintage, and it's one of the things that I live by. When I love a producer's work, I don't look at it from the perspective of, oh well, 14 wasn't that great, so I'm gonna skip it.
No,
You never know. How many times I'm sure you've had the situation where you've been surprised by, a vintage that was supposedly a horrible vintage, but a bottle gets put in front of you and it just like it's otherworldly and it's just extremely good. We've all seen it, right?
absolutely. Listen, I remember once reading this article about this. Uh, in Italy, you always say, you say the sin, you don't say the sinner. Anyway, about this wine writer, very, very famous wine writer, he was saying, he's carrying on saying, really shitty vintage in Burgundy, great vintage in Australia. So what are you supposed to do? I mean, you're supposed to buy Australian wine that vintage and not buy. I mean, I don't understand that at all. I really don't understand that at all. One thing I want to really say, it's very, very important. In the end, I find my palate after, decades of drinking, I don't like to taste that much anymore. I like to drink, okay? And I like to drink, moderately, but I like to drink it. I don't like to have 20 bottles in front of me and taste it. Doesn't do it to me anymore. But a humble wine, if it's an honest wine,
Yes.
is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful thing to drink. You don't need to look for the Grand Crus. You can't even drink them every day. It doesn't make any sense. It's like, eating in a 3-star restaurant, lunch and dinner. But I do find that there's been what's known a treason, what Benda called the treason of the clerics. Winemakers have followed the industry much too much and have bent their rules and have created monsters. But wines, since Dionysius and probably before to us, and who knows for how long more, wines from the humblest to the very finest have, have driven away the blues and have helped us go through everything that we do go through with graciousness and beauty. And in the end, I think that's what it is. Wine is the weaver of dreams. Like a rhapsode, weaves verses. That's what wine is. And if you lose that for whatever reason, if you lose sight of that, you're not going to make good wine. You're not going to drink good wine. You have to have that element, I think.
I couldn't agree more. So guys, we're about out of time here. I honestly, Marco, I think you and I could keep on going for another hour or more. What I would love to do is to get you back again, maybe in a couple of months, and maybe even with your brother or something, and we can really go even deeper into all the different things that you guys have done for wine industry.
With great pleasure, Eric. With great pleasure.
It has. So before I say goodbye, though, let me just say to everybody that has been watching, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for all your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. Like I said, it literally, this hour has just disappeared, and I think we only covered about half of what I had originally intended on covering. But that's just unfortunate as it goes. Again, super happy to have had Marco here today. This is one of the wineries that I have been following, Terre Nere, for literally since the 2005 vintage. They're must-buys for me every year. The hardest part is that their diverse portfolio, and I was saying every bottle has its own place. It's the hardest part for me is just trying to figure out where to really sink my quantities in each year. So I end up buying big mixed cases is what I end up doing. But we're talking about a producer that was first in the scene of Mount Etna, not absolutely first, but like pioneer of where Mount Etna is today. The prices are still remarkably fair. And we're talking about Crus today, but the reality is that you need to also check out this man's Rosso and the Rosato. These are all amazing wines at amazing price points that have really exposed one of what we have discovered to be one of Italy's most noble terroir, and will only continue to gain in popularity. Marco, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to say before signing off to everybody here today?
Just my very best to everyone, and enjoy good wines.
Enjoy good wines. Absolutely. Marco, be safe, be healthy. You and I will talk soon.
Thank you, Eric. Ciao. Ciao.